Hello everyone and welcome to another episode in the Saab project. In the previous episode the new shell got revealed to you guys and very quickly it became apparent that starting the thing would require more than just turning the key. In this episode we continue on our quest to revive the engine for your entertainment. Prepare for an episode filled with dodgy connectors, an abundance of blue goop, and sooty black clouds.
Well, that was a bit of a Smokey adventure.
All my friends, hello rider.
Okay, so we are going to pick up where we left off in the previous episode. We tried to start the car, but the starter was faulty. So since then I have dropped it off for revision and that should be ready, I think, tomorrow. So in the meanwhile, while we wait for it, I'm going to focus on the other necessary stuff that we still need to finish. And one of those things is the fuel tank. In the previous episode we determined that there was a little bit of dirt inside of the fuel tank, so that is why it came off the car, so that we could clean it. Since then I have cleaned the outside a little bit so that less dirt would fall into this hole once we are handling the tank. But the inside is still untouched. All the gasoline has evaporated and now we only have those particles left. So I'm going to try to flush them out with the pressure washer. Using the leaf blower I managed to dry the tank pretty quickly and all the dust and little particles are completely gone. So once we change these fuel hoses, the tank should be ready to go back on the car. Some glue to keep the foam in place. Tomorrow I have an opportunity to vapor hone some stuff, so I think I'm going to take off the intake manifold just to see if there is a new gasket behind it, and also the same for the thermostat housing. I don't know if the thermostat has been replaced. I do notice that there is a new gasket here in between, or at least there is a gasket, but I also am not a fan of this blue goop, so I'm going to take those off, and maybe even the fuel pump as well. First I'm removing this intake hose. Some very nice tape engineering going on here. Next we'll take off the carburetor. There are 4 13mm nuts that keep it onto the intake manifold. Nice. This blue stuff is just everywhere. To take off the intake manifold we have to drop the coolant, or in this case the tap water. Oh, wow. That is going to be fun to scrape off.
A little trick I learned to remove sticky gaskets like this is by first spraying them with some WD-40. It softens up the gasket material, making it easier to remove.
Now let's take off the thermostat housing.
Oh.
Next I want to take a look at the carburetor. A revision kit is on the way, but we can already start with taking it apart. I think this is a preloaded spring that pushes against the piston. So what I understand from these carburetors is that when you are applying the throttle, this cylinder goes up and down, which moves this needle, and that needle sits in an opening that lets more or less fuel go through from underneath. Always great to have a bunch of silicone floating around in your carburetor. I think this piece influences the cold start. I think it's weird that there is no gasket here, but I could be wrong. And then this came off here. Underneath here should be the float. That seems to be working. Seems like the filter can do with it clean. If I'm not mistaken, that part is for temperature compensation.
Lastly, I took off the throttle mechanism and the deceleration valve, and that is it for the carburetor disassembly.
Okay guys, so it is the next day, and as you can clearly see, some stuff has happened. So I got all of this stuff vapor honed and it looks absolutely spectacular. Much better than the silver paint that was on there. So pretty much all of this is ready to go back onto the car. The only thing is that I'm still waiting for the gaskets for the inlet manifold and the thermostat housing. The valve cover gasket was good enough to reuse, so in theory this could be mounted on the engine. But first I'm going to take out this little plate because I am sure that there is going to be more of this glass bead media hiding underneath, and I obviously don't want that to go into my engine. To take the plate out, I'm going to first grind away these rivets. Yowzes. And that is why I took it apart. And I think this is not supposed to be here. Drilling out the rivets. That is one valve cover ready to go back onto the car, but first we're going to take a look at the starter. This is the starter that was on the car and it is absolutely unrecognizable. I dropped it off for revision and the guy did a stunning job. It has gotten a new starter solenoid, new bearings, new gears, so pretty much a complete revision, and it looks awesome. So this is also ready to go on the car, except for the fact that the battery cable going through the starter doesn't look all too good. This was made by the previous owner and the terminal that goes on the starter looks absolutely disgusting. So we are going to fix this. I mean, come on. How can you think this is a good idea? I'm curious what is going to be underneath all of this. That is one hell of a terminal.
The terminals on the cable going from the starter to the alternator also didn't look very happy, so I decided to redo the entire starter loom.
Here we have the result of an afternoon of work. I know it's not that exciting, but these things are important in my opinion. So we've got all new cables with new connectors and new terminals that have been crimped on properly. So everything is cut to size and should fit in the engine bay nicely. But before we're going to throw it in, we're going to cover it with this insulation tape. Done, now let's throw it in the car. The cable has been completely installed and now I'm just hoping it's going to work. I think I should have tested everything before mounting it permanently. But yeah, let's just keep our fingers crossed and hope that the starter motor turns around. That sounded pretty good, so now we can remount the valve cover, the intake manifold and the thermostat housing. Now I'm going to install the thermostat housing. Next is the distributor. There's a line here, so we'll see how that turns out timing wise. Some new spark plug cables. I'm going to install the clutch cylinder now together with the hard line. I had to rob this of the other car because I have a flexible one on the way, but it hasn't arrived yet. So if we want to move the car today, we'll have to use this. This pin needs to go through the pedal. Okay. Good. Install done. Let's throw in some brake fluid to see what happens. And now bleeding the system.
After bleeding the clutch, I also did the brakes off camera, so basically the car was ready to drive. But there are a couple of pieces still missing, and one of those is the carburetor.
Okay, let's finally rebuild this carb. So I vapor honed this and it looks heaps better than before. When vapor honing, I blocked off some of the important areas so that not too much of the sand would get inside of the carburetor. And then afterwards I cleaned it out with compressed air and some carb cleaner, and this is where we are at right now. So she is ready to be rebuilt, and we're going to start with the float chamber. First the float needle, and something to notice is that on the other float needle there was a little filter, but I couldn't find that at the store where I buy my car parts, so I'm going to just install it without. Next are the floats, and I actually bought a set of new ones because I didn't notice this at first, but these ones are leaking. There is this tiny residue spot right here which indicates that there has been fuel on the inside of the float, so I went ahead and bought a new set. What we need to do now is adjust the floats, and the service manual states that these need to be set between 16 and 17 millimeters, measuring from this edge to the top part of the float. That is with the needle closed and no gasket installed. I have set this height at 16 millimeters, and you can see that this one is a little high, and this one, yeah, a little bit as well. So I'm going to bend this until it is perfect.
That looks right about perfect. Yeah. Next I'm going to put on the bottom cover, but I'm wondering if I am missing a part here because there are threads in there and it looks like something might slide in or over this hole. There was nothing in the carb when I took it apart, so if anybody knows, please let me know. Next we're going to take a look at the deceleration valve that sits right over here. This diaphragm has seen better days. It was very stiff at first, so I dunked it into some brake cleaner overnight to soften it up. And it did help, but still it is weirdly shaped and it's not going to seal off properly, so we're going to replace it with a new one. I think this goes on here. Then this guy. And then another one. And then this goes on top with the spring. And then that goes on here. Next is the temperature compensator. Basically what this does is opening this valve to let in more or less air, and it does that depending on the outside temperature. These can be adjusted and it seemed like it was already adjusted correctly, so I am just going to put it in with new O-rings. Now we're going to start putting in the throttle mechanism. I think this goes on like this, then this on top, then this guy, yeah. That feels pretty good. And now the choke mechanism. Then these brackets can go on, and I had to make some gaskets myself because I think the ones in my kit were incorrect. Next, the needle, piston and diaphragm can go back in. I actually didn't replace this because it still is in excellent condition, and I find that the one in my rebuild kit is a bit too stiff. I've read that these should be very flexible, and since this is in excellent condition, we're just going to put it back in. And then the spring.
Last thing we need to do is fill it up with oil here. My service manual states that I need to do that with ATF, so we're going to go ahead and do that. I think it is ready, so now let's put it back onto the car. So to start the car, I think for now that we are done with working in the engine bay, there still might be some vacuum hoses that are connected wrong, but I don't find a diagram online with all the vacuum hoses and how they should be routed, so I'm going by feeling here. I kept off the ones that I didn't know, so that should be good for now. So I guess the last thing that we need to do to try to get this car running is to install the fuel tank. Exciting times. I'm going to try to already fill the float bowl, that way we don't have to crank it for 20 minutes before fuel hits the carburetor. That should do it. Okay, it's time. Well, that was a bit of a Smokey adventure. I think something in the timing might be wrong. I'm going to see if I can find something. Okay, so we are now 2 or 3 days after I first started this engine, and during the past few days I have been thinking non-stop as to what the issue might be, why this car isn't running as it is supposed to. First I'll show you again what this engine does. I think it is pretty clear what the issue is. Now I just have to figure out what the solution is. And I'm sure that there will be some very capable people watching that know a lot about these Saabs. So I am open to suggestions. If you have an idea, just throw it in the comments. I read every single one of them, and maybe we can work something out together. I'll quickly go over everything that I have already checked. I started with looking at the ignition system, and the first thing that I did was put the timing advance at 17 degrees before top dead center of the first piston. I did that by turning the distributor, and 17 degrees is what is prescribed in my repair manual, so that should be good. And it helped with smoothing out the idle a little bit, but it didn't solve the issue. So next I put in the coil from the other car because I knew that was good, but that made no difference, so the coil isn't our issue. Then for some ruling out, I also changed the spark plugs again. That also made no difference. And then lastly, I ordered a new ignition module just to also rule out an issue with that. My gut feeling tells me that is not going to be our problem, but yeah, it is good to rule out some things. I do also have to say that I checked if the advance in the distributor is working, and that seemed to do what it is supposed to. So I don't think our issue is going to be in the ignition system, but if I have missed something, please let me know. Then what I did next was take off the valve cover again and check the engine timing, because the cylinder head has come off the car, which meant that the timing chain also needed to come off. Maybe during the assembly of everything, the timing chain wasn't put on correctly, but I verified that and that checked out. So the engine timing also isn't the issue. And then finally for the carburetor, there are two things that I did. One of those was that I quickly noticed that all the oil that I put in the carburetor was completely gone. It got sucked into the engine, and that was due to an O-ring on the mixture set screw that was completely gone. So I changed it out and now the oil stays in there. And then next I tried adjusting the mixture by turning that screw, and yeah, that didn't really make a difference on the backfiring issue. So that means that I am officially out of ideas. So I am afraid that that is all she wrote for this episode, as I have run out of time. It is kind of sad that the engine isn't turning over as nicely as I was hoping to, but still I am kind of glad that the mechanical side of things does sound pretty healthy, which is already nice. And I am sure that it is going to be something very small that we will be able to figure out together. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. If you did, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. And I hope to see all of you in the next one.